What was your initial reaction to the news that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were stepping back and moving to Canada?
And then Meghan came along and suddenly everything changed. Everything changed, I think, for the worse for our family, because although the first year of Meghan, well, I was shocked, but not surprised, if that makes sense.
Buckingham Palace has confirmed that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will not be returning as working members of the royal family.
And once again, you know, what changed? What changed? Obviously, since he got married, he's changed. And whatever it is, whether Meghan can't stand being...
What I want to make clear is we're not walking away. And we certainly aren't walking away from you. It has been our privilege to serve you, and we will continue to lead a life of service. So in that respect, nothing changes.
You know, Harry is very much loved by the Queen, and she's, I mean, when they did that...
She kind of knew what it meant to be a royal without being royal, you could say. Meghan had a go-get-'em Californian attitude, very different to other members of the royal family. And Harry and Meghan didn't really want to play by the team's rules, and that, of course, set them on a collision course to eventually leaving the royal fold.
After a very successful tour, you have to tell yourself who's advising him, who's telling him. Certainly not Buckingham Palace, certainly not Clarence House. Only be one person, and that's Meghan.
But I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's, and for Archie's as well, because I could see where this was headed.
And to me, he's still a hero, and I don't want him to go. And I hope we can see the old Harry someday back here. He'll do anything to keep her happy, and if this is what the price is, he'll pay it.
Arthur Edwards had photographed the royal family for over 50 years. He had seen everything: weddings, funerals, scandals, crises. But when he was finally asked about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's exit from royal life, what he said was not what anyone expected. If you want more deep dives like this, and the ones that go beyond the headlines, subscribe to Royal Archives, because this story goes much deeper than what made the news. Arthur Edwards wasn't just a photographer. He was a witness. For decades, he traveled with the royal family. He stood in the same rooms. He watched the same moments unfold in real time. So when he started speaking openly about what he believed happened with Harry and Meghan, the royal community paid attention, because this wasn't speculation from someone on the outside. This was someone who had been inside that world for longer than most people can imagine. Before all of this, Harry was a different person, not just another royal. By many accounts, including Edwards' own, he was one of the most natural members of the family. On tours, he joked with athletes, laughed with children, and turned even the most formal royal occasions into something human. Edwards had photographed Harry since he was a child. He watched him grow up. And for a long time, he believed Harry understood exactly who he was and what his role meant. But then things began to change. Not all at once, gradually, quietly. And when Edwards eventually reflected on the timeline publicly, he pointed to something that many people had already noticed, but hadn't wanted to say out loud. The shift aligned with one specific period in Harry's life, his relationship with Meghan Markle. Now, to be clear, Edwards never claimed that Meghan was the sole reason for everything that followed, but he did say that the dynamic between Harry and the institution began to fracture in ways that couldn't be explained by pressure alone, because the signs were there early. When Archie was born, there was no traditional royal presentation, no public walkout on the steps, no coordinated media access. Instead, information came out slowly, on their terms, differently. And for royal watchers who had followed the institution for years, and including Edwards, that break from tradition wasn't small. It signaled something, because the royal family had always operated within a specific structure, and suddenly, that structure was being rewritten in real time. Edwards, reflecting on it publicly, suggested the couple seemed increasingly determined to define their own terms, even when those terms created friction with the people closest to them. And then came the silence.
They've been away for 6 weeks, and there's not been a peep out of them until they posted a picture at Christmas.
6 weeks? No appearances, no updates, no communication with the public, until a carefully released image broke through, and the reaction wasn't what anyone expected, because the usual warmth wasn't there. Something had already shifted in how the public was reading them. Behind the scenes, reports at the time placed the couple in Canada, and Edwards, looking back, noted that Canada wasn't a random choice.
They're obviously working out a system where they could work and live in Canada and maybe pop up and down to California when it suited them. And if that offends them, well then maybe it's time they went to America. But do you think Americans are going to do that or the Canadians are going to do that? Of course not. They'll be watching them just as closely.
It was close to the United States. It was familiar. And it was, as he and others observed, a strategic position, somewhere between the royal world they were stepping away from and the media world they were stepping toward. What happened next confirmed what many had already suspected, because across royal circles and online commentary, one conversation kept surfacing. Was this exit really about escaping pressure? Or was it about something else entirely? A calculated move toward independence, platform building, and a life outside the institution. Edwards, in his own words, made clear he believed Harry had been changed by his relationship in ways that were not always in Harry's best interest.
Harry was the greatest of all the royals as far as we were concerned. And he suddenly turned into probably, as I say, the most unhappiest and difficult to work with. And there's only one common denominator, and that is when he got married. Now,
that's not editorial framing. That's one of the longest-serving royal insiders saying it directly. Just months before Megxit, Harry had led successful royal tours. He'd visited communities tied to his mother's legacy. He'd supported charities. He'd shown every outward sign of someone committed to the role. And then, almost overnight, there were legal battles with the press, a withdrawal from traditional media access, and a complete change in direction. Edwards found that contrast impossible to reconcile, and perhaps the most shocking detail Edwards pointed to wasn't the decision itself. It was how the decision was made. Because according to multiple reports, and Edwards spoke to this publicly, senior members of the royal family were not fully informed in advance, including the Queen, a woman in her 90s, the head of the institution, Harry's grandmother. She found out, along with everyone else, when the statement dropped.
The decision that I have made for my wife and I to step back is not one I made lightly.
Think about what that means. A decision this significant, a break this final. And the people closest to Harry, and the ones who had known him his entire life, were not brought into the conversation, which leads to the question Edwards kept returning to. Not just what changed Harry, but who had enough influence to make him comfortable with that. Because as the dust began to settle, it wasn't just the public asking questions. Inside the palace, relationships that had taken decades to build were quietly fracturing. And one of the closest bonds in Harry's life, the one that had carried both of them through their mother's death, was starting to break apart. What Arthur Edwards said about that is where this story gets even harder to look away from. Because Edwards didn't just talk about the exit itself, he talked about what the exit cost. And the number he kept coming back to wasn't about money, it was about family. William and Harry had been described by those inside the palace as closer than most people realized, not just brothers in title, brothers who had built something together. The mental health campaigns, the charitable work, the joint public identity that carried the monarchy forward after Diana's death. Edwards had photographed both of them for years, and in his assessment, the rift that formed between them wasn't the kind that heals easily. He described Harry as someone who had, in his view, walked away from a partnership that William had genuinely counted on.
And that the fact that they no longer have a relationship, I think, is very, very sad. He was there to support his brother, and he's not doing it anymore. He's leaving.
That's not tabloid speculation. That's a man who stood in the room saying it publicly. And what made it harder to process for Edwards and for many watching closely was that Harry had spoken about his role in almost reverent terms just years before. Supporting his brother, serving the institution, understanding what was expected of him. So when he stepped back, the contrast between who Harry said he was and what he chose to do became almost impossible to explain away. And the damage didn't stop with William. Reports at the time, which Edwards referenced in his commentary, suggested that Prince Charles, now king, was also caught off guard by how the exit unfolded. Charles is not known for impulsive reactions. He is measured. He values process. He values communication. So the fact that a decision this consequential appeared to move forward without proper dialogue with him left a wound that took years to even partially address. And this is where Edwards's perspective carries real weight, because he wasn't analyzing a political institution. He was talking about a family he had watched for 50 years. And he made clear that what happened in 2020 wasn't just an organizational restructuring. It was personal. People were hurt. Relationships were damaged. And some of those relationships, in his view, may never fully recover. When the exit was first announced, public sympathy leaned toward Harry and Meghan. People understood the pressure. They remembered what the media had done to Diana. They gave the couple the benefit of the doubt. But as more details emerged, about the timing, about what family members were told, about the interviews that followed, that sympathy began to split. And in Edwards' view, that split was not accidental. Because what came after Megxit told its own story. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir, each one added a new layer of public accusation against the royal family. And Edwards, who had spent a career defending the institution he covered, was not quiet about how he felt.
After a very successful tour, you have to tell yourself who's advising him, who's telling him. Certainly not Buckingham Palace, certainly not Clarence House. Only be one person, and that's Meghan.
He believed Harry was being used as a vehicle, that the man he had photographed since childhood had been guided toward decisions that served someone else's narrative more than his own. Again, that is not an anonymous source. That is Arthur Edwards, on the record. Now, Edwards is not a neutral observer. He has spent decades embedded in royal culture. He has loyalties. He has a perspective shaped by proximity. Not everyone shares his read on what happened. But the reason his voice matters in this story is precisely because of that proximity. He wasn't guessing. He was grieving something he had watched fall apart in real time, because once Harry and Meghan stepped back, the protection of the royal system disappeared with them. No guaranteed media structure, no institutional backing, no inherited goodwill. Instead, two people building a brand in one of the most unforgiving media environments in the world, and Edwards' warning, delivered quietly in interview after interview, was essentially this.
And I'd say, Harry, just go back to the way you were, because you were a star. You were certainly a star as far as I was concerned.
The royals could absorb this. The institution had survived worse, but Harry, the individual, had given up something he could not easily get back. And the years that followed have given that warning a certain weight. Because stepping away from royal scrutiny did not reduce attention. If anything, it amplified it. Every partnership, every deal, every public statement, all of it now existed without the insulation of the institution. And the results, commercially, publicly, in terms of reputation, have been scrutinized more intensely than almost anything that came before. And Edwards has continued to speak, continued to share what he saw, not with bitterness, but with the specific sadness of someone who watched something break that didn't have to. A young man who once raced Usain Bolt and made children laugh on tour. A young man Edwards had photographed through some of the hardest moments of his life. And a decision, made in a very specific window of time, that changed the trajectory of everything. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is not simple. Arthur Edwards is one voice, but he's a voice with 50 years of access. and what he said publicly about Harry and Meghan's exit is something that deserves to be heard in full. Subscribe to Royal Archives for more deep dives like this, because sometimes the people closest to the story see the most clearly.